There are moments in life when the silence feels heavier than any spoken word. Moments when prayers seem to rise no higher than the ceiling, when doors remain closed, and when the very ground beneath your certainty feels as though it has shifted. In such moments, the heart begins to ask dangerous questions. Have I been forgotten? Was that sign only my imagination? Is God distant? Or am I simply unworthy? Yet it is precisely in these seasons of uncertainty that a deeper truth begins to unfold, one that does not shout from the heavens, but whispers with deliberate tenderness, I am testing you. I sent you the sign. We are, by nature, impatient creatures. We prefer declarations to mysteries, outcomes to processes, crowns to crosses, but the divine does not operate according to our appetite for immediacy. If God were only interested in our comfort, he might arrange the world like a well-padded room, safe and predictable. Instead, he arranges it as a proving ground. Beautiful, yes, but also bracing, filled with light, yet streaked with shadow. Not because he delights in our confusion, but because he is shaping something sturdier than fleeting happiness. He is forming faith. A test, in our ordinary understanding, suggests the possibility of failure. It carries the scent of anxiety, the fear of not measuring up. Yet when God says, I am testing you, it is not the threat of abandonment, but the assurance of involvement. A teacher does not test an empty classroom. A refiner does not purify stones he intends to discard. Testing implies intention. It reveals that your life is not drifting aimlessly upon indifferent tides, but is being guided through purposeful waters. And what of the sign? How often we beg for one, some unmistakable mark in the sky, some thunderous voice to remove all doubt. We imagine that if such a sign were granted, our faith would become unshakable. But history and experience alike reveal the contrary. Signs do not create faith, they expose it. The sign you received, whether a sudden opportunity, a closed door, an unexpected delay, a stirring in your spirit, was not given merely to reassure you. It was given to see what you would do next. For a sign is an invitation, not a conclusion. It calls you to step forward when the path is only partially illuminated. It asks whether you will trust the giver more than the gift. Many of us want the blessing without the stretching, the promise without the preparation. Yet God, in his quiet wisdom, understands that untested faith remains fragile. A belief never challenged is a belief never deepened. There is also this curious paradox. The very struggles we interpret as divine absence may in fact be evidence of divine nearness. Consider how a craftsman works, his hands closest to the material at the most delicate stages. When pressure increases, when circumstances tighten, it may not be because God has withdrawn, but because he is engraving something eternal upon the surface of your character. The test is not a spectacle for the world. It is an intimate exchange between your soul and its maker. You may look at your life today and see only delay. You may see prayers unanswered, relationships strained, finances uncertain, doors unopened. Yet, what if these are not signs of rejection, but instruments of refinement? What if the delay is teaching endurance, the silence cultivating discernment, the obstacle strengthening resolve? The test is rarely about information, for God already knows the measure of your faith. It is about transformation. You are being shown to yourself, and in this testing, blessings are not absent. They are often disguised. We tend to recognize blessings only when they arrive wrapped in comfort, but sometimes a blessing comes as clarity after confusion, as resilience after heartbreak, as wisdom after failure. The blessing is not always the removal of difficulty. Sometimes it is the growth that difficulty produces. God's blessings are not shallow tokens of affection. They are profound gifts aimed at eternity. When God says, I sent you the sign, he is reminding you that nothing has been random. That conversation, that disappointment, that opportunity you almost ignored, These are threads in a tapestry still being woven. You see only the underside, tangled and incomplete. He sees the design. The test is whether you will trust the artist, while the pattern remains hidden. To be tested, then, is not to be condemned. It is to be considered worthy of growth. It is to be invited into a deeper fellowship where faith is no longer a fragile sentiment, but a deliberate choice. The sign has been given. The season has been appointed. The question is not whether God is speaking, but whether we are willing to respond, not with panic, nor with despair, but with steady trust that even in the testing, and especially in the testing, His hand remains upon us. There are seasons in the life of every soul when certainty seems to recede like the tide, leaving behind a shore littered with unanswered prayers and restless thoughts. It is in such seasons that the whisper comes, "I am testing you." At first hearing, this declaration feels unsettling. We would much prefer to hear, "I am rewarding you," or "I am removing the difficulty at once." Yet a test carries within it a hidden dignity. It suggests that our lives are not accidents, not random collections of joys and sorrows, but purposeful journeys washed over with intent. To be tested by God is not to be toyed with. The notion that the divine would manipulate human hearts for amusement is unworthy of Him. A true test is never designed for humiliation. It is designed for revelation. When gold is placed in the fire, the flame does not create its value. It reveals it. In much the same way, the trials we encounter do not invent our faith. They expose its substance. If our trust rests merely upon pleasant circumstances, it will evaporate when those circumstances shift. But if it rests upon the character of God, it will endure the heat. We often misunderstand the nature of spiritual testing because we equate love with ease. We assume that if God truly cares, He will smooth every road and silence every storm. Yet even in our human experience, we know this to be false. A loving parent does not shield a child from every challenge. Rather, they allow measured difficulty so that strength may be formed. Muscles grow by resistance, not by rest alone. Courage is born not in the absence of fear, but in the decision to act despite it. Why should we imagine that the soul grows differently? When God says, "I am testing you," it is not an announcement of impending disaster, but an invitation to deeper trust. The test may come in many forms. It may arrive as delay, when what you long for most remains just beyond reach. It may appear as silence, when heaven seems quiet and guidance feels obscured. It may manifest as opposition, when others misunderstand your intentions or question your path. Each of these circumstances tempts the heart toward doubt, and therein lies the essence of the test. Not whether you can control the outcome, but whether you will remain faithful when control is absent. There is something profoundly transformative about remaining steadfast when no immediate reward is visible. In such moments, faith ceases to be a transaction and becomes a relationship. If we follow God only because blessings are obvious, then our devotion is fragile, contingent upon favorable results. But when we choose obedience, even in obscurity, we declare that our trust is rooted not in outcomes, but in His nature. The test, therefore, refines motive as much as character. It is also worth considering that God's tests are often tailored with remarkable precision. They touch the very areas where we are weakest, not to expose us to ridicule, but to strengthen what would otherwise remain brittle. The impatient are tested with waiting. The fearful are tested with uncertainty. The proud are tested with humility. The self-reliant are tested with situations beyond their ability to manage alone. Each trial, though uncomfortable, carries within it the possibility of growth. The question is not whether the test is fair by our standards, but whether it is fruitful according to His wisdom. We may ask, why must growth require pain? Yet much of what is most valuable in life is born through struggle. The seed must split before it sprouts. The dawn must push back the night. The soul must wrestle with doubt before arriving at conviction. Testing, then, is not evidence of divine displeasure, but of divine intention. It signals that God sees more in you than you currently see in yourself. He tests not to measure your worth, but to awaken it. There is a quiet assurance hidden within every divine test. You are not alone in it. The very one who permits the trial walks with you through it. The test is never a solitary confinement. It is a guided passage. Though the path may be steep, the guide is faithful. And often, when you look back upon the season you once read, you will discover that it was the crucible in which your deepest strengths were forged. Thus, when you hear the whisper, "I am testing you," do not interpret it as a sentence of despair. Hear instead the echo of purpose. Understand that your present difficulty may be the instrument shaping your future resilience. The test is not the end of your story. It is a chapter in which your faith is invited to mature, your character invited to deepen, and your trust invited to stand firm even when the evidence is incomplete. There is a peculiar tenderness in the declaration, "I sent you the sign." It suggests not merely power, but intention. The universe is vast beyond comprehension, its movements intricate and immeasurable, and yet this statement narrows all that immensity into something deeply personal. A sign is not an accident. It is not a stray coincidence wandering into your life without purpose. It is a deliberate interruption, a quiet nudge within the ordinary flow of days, placed there by a hand that sees farther than you do. We are often tempted to believe that if God wishes to communicate, he must do so in spectacle. We imagine thunder splitting the sky, or some unmistakable miracle that leaves no room for doubt. Yet, more often than not, the signs we are given are subtle. They arrive clothed in circumstance, a conversation that lingers in the mind, a door that closes despite your careful planning, an opportunity that appears at precisely the moment you had resolved to give up. Because they do not dazzle, we sometimes dismiss them. We overlook the whisper because we are waiting for a shout. But a sign is not meant to overwhelm your will. It is meant to invite it. If God were to remove all ambiguity, obedience would cease to be an act of faith and become a reflex. The beauty of a sign lies in its gentleness. It asks something of you. It requires attention. It requires humility. It requires the courage to interpret and respond. When God says, "I sent you the sign," he is reminding you that your life is neither random nor neglected. You are being guided, though not coerced. There is also this. A sign is often given not to confirm your comfort, but to challenge your direction. Many of us pray for clarity, but when clarity disrupts our plans, we hesitate. Suppose you have been moving steadily toward a goal, certain it is the right one, and suddenly obstacles multiply. The effort that once felt smooth becomes heavy. Doors close, support fades. You interpret this as failure. Yet, what if the closed door itself is the sign? What if the resistance is not rejection, but redirection? The sign does not always affirm what you desire. Sometimes it corrects it. On the other hand, there are signs that arrive as encouragement in the midst of weariness. A single word spoken by a stranger can reignite hope. A small success can assure you that your labor is not in vain. These moments may appear trivial to the outside observer, but to the one who receives them, they carry unmistakable weight. They feel timely, almost tailored. That is because they are. The one who sees your private discouragement knows precisely when to send reinforcement. Yet signs are not self-executing. They demand discernment. It is possible to misread them, to twist them into endorsements of our own preferences. This is why humility is essential. To receive a sign rightly, one must be willing to ask not only, "What do I want this to mean?" but, "What is God truly directing?" This posture requires surrender. It acknowledges that the divine perspective surpasses your own, that the path you would naturally choose may not be the one leading to your deepest growth. There is something profoundly relational about a sign. It implies communication between persons, not a mechanical exchange between force and matter. When you recognize a sign, you are participating in a dialogue. You are acknowledging that your life is being addressed. And like any dialogue, it requires response. A sign ignored is not a failure on God's part. It is an opportunity left unopened. A sign acted upon, however, becomes the doorway to transformation. It is also worth noting that signs rarely provide the entire map. They illuminate the next step, not the entire journey. We would prefer a comprehensive blueprint, every twist and turn outlined in advance. But faith grows in increments. When you act upon the light you have been given, more light follows. The sign is sufficient for obedience today, even if it does not answer every question about tomorrow. When God says, "I sent you the sign," He is drawing your attention backward as much as forward. He is asking you to reflect, to notice the patterns you might have overlooked. Perhaps the sign was present in repetition, in the same message surfacing through different channels. Perhaps it was in unrest, the persistent sense that something must change. Perhaps it was in peace, the unexpected calm that accompanied a risky decision. None of these are trivial. They are threads of guidance woven into the fabric of your days. The challenge is not the absence of signs, but the readiness to perceive them. A distracted heart may miss what a watchful one would recognize instantly. To live attentively is to live in expectation that God is indeed active, indeed speaking, indeed guiding. The sign has been sent. The question is whether you will trust that it carries purpose, whether you will step forward in response, believing that behind the subtlety lies sovereign care directing your path with intention and grace. There is a sacred tension in the space between receiving a sign and witnessing its fulfillment. It is here, in this waiting corridor, that the soul is stretched in ways it never anticipated. You have heard the whisper. You have sensed the direction. You are persuaded that God has spoken, and yet the visible evidence has not arrived. The promise lingers like dawn beneath the horizon. Certain but unseen, it is in this interval that many falter, not because they lack belief in the sign itself, but because they underestimate the discipline required to endure the delay. Waiting, in our ordinary understanding, feels passive. It resembles standing still while time drips slowly forward. But spiritual waiting is anything but passive. It is an active posture of trust. It is the decision, renewed daily, to anchor your hope in what has been revealed rather than in what is immediately visible. When God allows you to wait, He is not idling. He is preparing. Preparation often occurs in hidden chambers. Roots grow downward long before branches reach upward. The unseen strengthening precedes the visible expansion. It is easy to celebrate faith when outcomes unfold swiftly. Gratitude comes naturally when doors open without resistance. But when days turn into weeks and weeks into months, and still the promise appears distant, the heart begins to negotiate. Doubt slips in quietly, suggesting that perhaps you misunderstood, perhaps the sign was coincidence, perhaps the test has become abandonment. Yet it is precisely here that faith matures from sentiment into conviction. Conviction does not depend upon constant reassurance. It rests upon character, upon the settled belief that God is consistent even when circumstances are not. Consider how often growth occurs beneath the surface of awareness. A seed buried in soil might appear lifeless to the casual observer. Nothing moves, nothing breaks the earth, but beneath that dark covering, invisible processes are at work. Structure forms, strength develops, life gathers itself for emergence. If one were impatient and dug up the seed daily to check its progress, growth would be stunted. So too with the promises of God. If we continually uproot our trust through anxiety and suspicion, we interfere with the quiet work being accomplished within us. There is also refinement in the delay. When something is postponed, motives are clarified. At the outset, we may desire a blessing for mixed reasons: recognition, comfort, vindication, ease. But as time passes, those motives are sifted. What remains is often purer, simpler, We begin to desire not merely the gift, but the giver. We realize that what we seek most deeply is not the outcome itself, but the assurance of His presence within it. Delay, then, becomes a purifier of intention. Moreover, the waiting season often reshapes capacity. The blessing you anticipate may require a version of you that does not yet exist. Responsibility demands resilience. Influence requires humility. Provision requires stewardship. If the fulfillment were granted prematurely, it might overwhelm rather than elevate. Thus, in love rather than neglect, God stretches your endurance, deepens your wisdom, and strengthens your discernment. The interval is not empty, it is formative. It is tempting to interpret silence as absence. Yet silence can also signify trust. A teacher who remains quiet during an examination is not indifferent. She trusts that the student has been prepared. When God seems silent, it may be because the instruction has already been given. The sign was clear, the direction was set. Now comes the opportunity to walk it out without continual confirmation. This silence invites you to rely upon what you already know rather than demanding new assurances at every step. There is a subtle courage required in continuing forward when applause is absent and progress invisible. It is the courage to plant when harvest is not yet in sight. It is the courage to obey when results are deferred. Such courage is not loud. It does not seek recognition. It endures quietly, sustained by a conviction that what God has spoken will not dissolve with time. If anything, time strengthens it. The waiting season also teaches attentiveness. When fulfillment is delayed, you become more aware of small mercies along the way. You notice incremental growth. You recognize subtle confirmations. Gratitude expands. The journey itself becomes meaningful, not merely the destination. In this way, the delay transforms from an obstacle into a classroom. When God says, in effect, remain steady, He is inviting you into partnership. He is not asking for blind endurance, but for informed trust. You have received the sign. You have sensed the test. Now you are being shaped through perseverance. The corridor of waiting is not a detour from your destiny. It is the very path by which you are being readied to step into it with strength, clarity, and a faith no longer fragile, but forged through time. There comes a point in every testing season when the struggle is no longer about circumstances, but about identity. The external pressures may remain the same: uncertainty, delay, misunderstanding, opposition, but something deeper is being confronted beneath them. The question quietly shifts from "when will this change?" to "who am I becoming through this?" It is here that the testing of God moves beyond surface refinement and begins shaping the very core of the soul. Trials have a curious way of stripping away illusions. In seasons of ease, we can maintain flattering narratives about ourselves. We believe we are patient until we are made to wait. We believe we are humble until we are overlooked. We believe we trust God fully until the outcome we desire is withheld. Testing exposes these hidden fractures, not to shame us, but to invite honesty. And honesty is the doorway to transformation. When God allows a test to press upon your life, He is not merely adjusting your circumstances. He is revealing your foundation. What sustains you when visible support collapses? What steadies you when affirmation disappears? If your sense of worth has been anchored in success, then failure feels like annihilation. If your identity has been rooted in approval, then rejection feels unbearable. But if your identity is grounded in being known and held by God, then even loss cannot erase you. The test reveals where you have placed your weight. There is something profoundly liberating about discovering that your value does not rise and fall with outcomes. The world measures worth by achievement, status, visibility. Yet God's measure is different. He is far more concerned with the condition of your heart than the scale of your accomplishments. In testing, He often removes the very things you thought defined you so that you might discover a deeper definition. one not dependent upon applause or attainment. When familiar markers of identity are shaken, you may feel as though you are dissolving. But what is actually dissolving are the false attachments that have quietly claimed authority over your sense of self. The test becomes a chisel, carefully removing what is unnecessary so that what is essential may stand clear. Such chiseling is rarely comfortable. Yet without it, the structure of your life would remain cluttered with fragile supports. It is also within testing that courage is refined, not the loud courage that boasts before battle, but the quiet courage that remains faithful when no one is watching. The courage to choose integrity when compromise would be easier. The courage to forgive when bitterness would feel justified. The courage to continue believing when cynicism appears more reasonable. These choices, repeated in obscurity, shape identity far more profoundly than dramatic gestures ever could. Testing also confronts pride in subtle ways. Success can foster the illusion of self-sufficiency. We begin to believe that our wisdom alone navigated us through prior victories. Then comes a situation beyond our control, a reminder of our limitations. In that humbling realization lies grace. For dependence upon God is not weakness, it is alignment with reality. We were never meant to carry the weight of ultimate control. Testing returns us to that truth. There is a refining of love as well. When blessings are abundant, gratitude flows easily. But when blessings seem scarce, love is tested for its authenticity. Do you love God only for what He provides, or for who He is? This is not a cruel question. It is an intimate one. True love endures strain. It does not dissolve when benefits diminish. In the furnace of difficulty, love either evaporates or deepens, and when it deepens, it becomes resilient, no longer dependent upon comfort. Moreover, identity formed through testing carries authority. A person who has walked through uncertainty and remained anchored speaks differently than one who has known only ease. Their words carry weight because they are forged in experience. Their compassion is richer because they understand struggle. Their confidence is quieter because it is rooted not in self-display, but in endured trust. Testing produces this depth. Perhaps the most significant transformation in such seasons is the shift from performance to presence. You begin to realize that your life is not a stage upon which you must continually prove yourself. It is a relationship in which you are already known. This realization steadies the soul. It allows you to endure misunderstanding without unraveling. It allows you to face delay without panic. It allows you to accept growth without resentment. When God tests you, He is not questioning your worth. He is strengthening your awareness of it. He is drawing you away from fragile identities built upon circumstance and into a steadier understanding of who you are in Him. The external situation may still be unresolved, the outcome still unfolding, but internally something solid is forming. And that solidity, this clarified identity, will sustain you long after the particular test has passed. There is a moment in every divine testing when the soul begins to perceive that the trial itself is not the final chapter, but the threshold to something greater. Up to this point, much has been said about refinement, waiting, identity, and endurance. Yet beneath all of it lies a promise often overlooked. God's tests are never purposeless, and they are never permanent. They are bridges, not destinations. They carry you from who you were into who you are being prepared to become. It is natural, when immersed in difficulty, to assume that the strain will last indefinitely. Pain has a way of stretching time, making days feel longer and nights heavier. But no season is eternal except the faithfulness of God. Tests have limits. They are measured. They are permitted only as far as they serve the work being accomplished within you. The same hand that allows the pressure also determines its boundaries. Nothing about your present struggle is uncontrolled or unnoticed. Often, the greatest transformation occurs just before the breakthrough. Yet breakthrough does not always resemble spectacle. It may not arrive with dramatic reversal or sudden abundance. Sometimes it comes as clarity, an inner steadiness that was absent before. Sometimes it arrives as release, the quiet freedom from fear that once governed you. Sometimes it appears as opportunity, doors opening that would crush the earlier version of you. What once seemed unbearable becomes understandable in hindsight. You begin to see that the test was shaping capacity. There is a profound difference between receiving a blessing prematurely and receiving it prepared. When something is gained without inner readiness, it can distort rather than elevate. Power without humility corrupts. Influence without wisdom misguides. Prosperity without gratitude enslaves. But when a blessing follows a season of testing, it is handled differently. The heart is softer. Perspective is broader. Dependence upon God remains intact. In this way, the test protects the blessing. It is also important to understand that not all rewards are external. The world tends to define victory in visible terms: promotion, recognition, restoration, abundance. Yet some of the most significant victories occur unseen. The triumph of patience over frustration, the triumph of forgiveness over resentment, the triumph of faith over fear. These internal shifts alter the trajectory of a life more profoundly than public achievements ever could. The reward of testing is not merely what you gain, but who you become. As the testing season draws toward its conclusion, there is often a subtle shift in atmosphere. The same circumstances that once provoked anxiety begin to lose their power. What once felt overwhelming now feels manageable. You notice that your reactions have changed. You are less shaken, less hurried, less desperate. This is evidence of growth. The test has done its work. You are no longer the same person who entered the trial. Strength has been forged quietly, without fanfare. There is also gratitude that emerges from endured testing, a gratitude deeper than surface thankfulness. It is not merely relief that the difficulty has passed. It is appreciation for what was formed through it. You begin to recognize that had the struggle not occurred, certain depths of character would have remained undeveloped. Certain convictions would have remained shallow. Certain dependencies would have remained misplaced. The test, once resented, becomes understood as mercy in disguise. Yet even as one test concludes, life continues to unfold. Growth is not a single event, but a continual journey. The purpose of one season's testing is to prepare you for greater trust in the next. Not necessarily greater difficulty, but greater responsibility, greater clarity, greater alignment with God's purposes. Each trial strengthens the foundation upon which future faith will stand. When God says, "I am testing you," it is not a declaration of distance, but of involvement. When He says, "I sent you the sign," it is not a cryptic message meant to confuse, but a loving guidance meant to direct. And when the season begins to shift, when the weight lifts and the air feels different, you realize that nothing was wasted. Every tear, every prayer, every moment of perseverance contributed to a work more enduring than temporary relief. The conclusion of testing is not merely the removal of pressure, it is the revelation of progress. You see more clearly, you trust more steadily, you stand more firmly. What once threatened to break you has instead built you. And though new seasons will come, as they always do, you will enter them with a confidence born not of naivete, but of experience. You have been tested and found strengthened. You have been guided and not abandoned. You have been shaped, not shattered.